about to hear is not for the faint of heart. If you've ever felt unsettled by old photographs, or thought something might be watching you from behind glass, maybe don't listen to this alone. A young couple had just moved into their new home in Harlan, Kentucky, a small American town nestled between wilderness and quiet roads. While unpacking, they discovered an old black and white photo tucked inside a forgotten book. The image showed a child standing in front of a window face, obscured by glaring sunlight. At first, they thought it was harmless, until the next moment, the photo changed. The child was now turning its head. From then on, each morning, the photo changed a little more. A hand against the glass, a shadow behind the child, an open mouth. This isn't just another scary story. It's one of the true scary stories whispered in corners of the internet, from obscure forums to haunting threads on Reddit, buried in collections of creepy stories and true creepy stories that keep readers up at night. The question is, will you stay long enough to find out what the child becomes? The morning after they found the photo, Dana woke up first. She moved sleepily into the kitchen of the old Victorian house, the floorboards creaking under her feet like tired bones. Steam rose from the coffee pot. Everything felt still except for the sense that she wasn't alone. There on the kitchen table where the photo had been left the night before, it lay again. But something had changed. The child in the black and white photo, once just a blurry silhouette, now had a hand pressed to the glass. A small, pale hand, and its eyes were just beginning to open. She called for Mark. Mark came quickly. He had that protective, skeptical demeanor, always brushing off the creepy stories Dana sometimes liked to read late at night on Reddit. But this wasn't like those stories from Reddit. This was real, tangible, physical. They both stared at the photograph. It was undeniably different. Maybe it's just a trick of the light, Mark said. Dana didn't respond, because deep down she already knew. This wasn't just a scary story. It was the beginning of something else, something worse. That night, they locked the photo in a drawer. The next morning, they found it on the mantle. This time, the child had moved closer to the window, its face clearer, its expression unreadable except for a slight tilt of the mouth that looked too much like a smirk. They burned the photo, watched the edges curl, watched it blacken to ash. By dusk, it was back, untouched, laid gently on their bed. Dana began searching online. She dug through forums, deep threads, even strange subreddits tagged true creepy stories. She read accounts of similar things, old objects that changed shape, old houses with hidden pasts. Some were dismissed as urban legends, others were never explained. But there was a pattern, and one detail kept repeating photographs that shouldn't exist. One post stood out. My grandfather was a park ranger in North Dakota. He once told me about a cursed photo found in an abandoned ranger cabin. It showed a group of campers smiling, but each year one of them would vanish from the picture, and in real life, they were never found. He called it a memory thief. He said the forest kept the rest. Another thread described something even darker. At Shenandoah National Park, a family found an old black and white image in their cabin. The picture kept updating every full moon. By the end of the year, it matched their family exactly. Only the youngest child in the image was missing a face. It wasn't just one park. It wasn't just one house. These things were everywhere. National park stories, creepy park ranger stories, scary horror stories that never made the news but were whispered around campfires. And now, it was happening to them. By the end of the week, Dana stopped sleeping. She kept watching the photo, because every time they looked away, something changed. The curtains in the picture moved, then the window cracked. Then the child was no longer inside. Mark tried to take control. He contacted the real estate agent, asked for the home's ownership history. The records were vague. The house had changed hands multiple times, usually after less than a year. One inside. Another had simply vanished. No forwarding address. No explanation. "It's just an old house," the agent said too quickly. Mark went to the local library in Harlan, Kentucky, dug into old archives, found true stories buried in yellowed newspaper clippings. One headline from 1983, "Young boy missing after fire. Last seen near family farmhouse window." Another from 1969, "Mother reports photo of son, alive and changing. Case dismissed as hysteria." Another from June 1912, "Harlan family flees home, claiming living photograph. No photo ever found." The more they searched, the more horror stories they unearthed. Not fictional, not ghost tales, but true horror stories forgotten by time until they returned. On the 10th day, Mark caught movement in the hallway, but nothing was there. Later, he checked the photo again. Now 2 children, the original and another behind it. With a stitched mouth, Dana begged to leave, to burn the house down, to run. Mark agreed. They packed their things, drove to a motel on the outskirts of town. But that night, the photo was waiting for them on the motel pillow. Now the 2 children were standing in a wilderness clearing, pine trees, fog, and in the distance, the outline of their house. They turned to an expert, an author named Loretta Gaines, who had written several books on creepy outdoor stories and scary true stories tied to physical objects. She'd worked with old Appalachian families, ex-park rangers, and researchers from Let's Read podcasts. When Donna called her, Loretta answered immediately. "I've been expecting your call," she said. They met at a coffee shop 2 towns away. Loretta arrived with a briefcase full of faded reports, old letters, even torn pages from banned books. She told them the photo was a window, but not just metaphorically. "It's an invitation," she said. "Every time you look at it, something looks back." Mark asked, "Then how do we stop it?" "You don't," she replied. "You witness it, you remember, you tell it." Loretta explained that the child in the photo is known in some wilderness stories as the listener, a spirit perhaps, or something older. They appear when a place remembers too much, she said. They show up in forgotten homes, ranger stations, even tents and scary weird stories posted to forums. Anywhere someone dies and no one speaks their name again. Dana was pale. "So what happens if we keep watching?" Loretta leaned in. "Then you become part of the picture." They didn't sleep that night. The photo had changed again. Now it showed their bedroom, Mark and Dana asleep, and the child standing at the foot of the bed. 2 days later, Dana disappeared. No sign of a break-in, no struggle. Her clothes, her phone, her suitcase untouched. Only one thing had changed. The photo. Now only Mark was in the bed, and the child was sitting beside him. Mark became a recluse. He stopped answering calls. He posted once to Let's Not Meet, a desperate plea. "If anyone has seen a photo that changes, please tell me what you did to stop it. I can't sleep. I'm starting to hear scratching behind the walls. I don't remember what my wife looked like anymore. I checked the mirror this morning. I wasn't in it." His post was removed for violating rules, but someone archived it. A podcast host read it on a special Halloween episode of Let's Read. Eventually, neighbors reported a smell. When the police entered the house, they found the photo. It showed no people now, just the window, just the curtains, gently swaying, and the outline of someone watching from the shadows. The official report listed it as an unresolved missing persons case. But weeks later, another young couple moved into the home. They found a photo, black and white, a child in the window. They didn't think much of it. At first, the photo would not go away, even after Dana disappeared. Even after Mark had done everything, burned it, shredded it, buried it, it kept returning. Sometimes on the kitchen table, sometimes tucked inside books he hadn't opened in years. Once it reappeared under his pillow. But it was no longer just a photo, it was watching him. And worse, it was he stopped going outside. Mark lived in shadows now, curtains drawn, phone unplugged, no TV, no internet. He'd posted once more on Reddit anonymously, this time under the subreddit r/creepy, the photo changes when I sleep. I think it dreams with me. Every morning something's different. Last night I saw myself in it. This morning I'm smiling in the photo, but I swear I didn't smile. The post went viral among true creepy stories, spreading through stories from Reddit, scary horror stories, YouTube compilations, and even podcast episodes on Let's Read. People debated if it was a hoax, a metaphor, a brilliant piece of fiction. But Mark wasn't writing for an audience. He was warning them. Some believed him. Messages began pouring in. A ranger from Oregon shared a chilling tale, how in the 1990s he'd found a photo nailed to a tree deep in a remote sector of a national park. Every patrol after that, something felt off. Radios died, compass needles spun. His own reflection would blink out of sync in his sunglasses. He described dreams of wilderness stories where trees bled, where faces grew out of bark. Eventually he resigned, burned his uniforms. But the dreams continued. He wrote, "There are other places, Mark. Places that remember. You didn't find the photo, it found you." Another user shared a park ranger story about an outpost in Alaska where maps would change overnight. Trails that used to lead somewhere stopped. Cabins moved. One hiker allegedly walked into fog and came back with no eyes. And always there was a photo. Mark started mapping them. He built a wall in his home string connecting locations, dates, parks, names. Glacier National Park, Shenandoah, Big Bend. They all had scary wood stories. They all had unexplained disappearances. They all had creepy outdoor stories involving photographs, reflections, or memory gaps. It wasn't just him. It was a network of hauntings. A system of stories tied together by something ancient, something remembering through true stories. One night he caught it happening, woke at 2:14 a.m., house dead silent, photo on the wall. He watched it. The child inside began to move. First, the hand lifted, then the eyes opened inside the photo. He blinked. Now there were 3 children, all facing outward, all smiling, and behind them was him, standing just outside the window. The next day, his nose bled for 3 hours. The photo bled too, from the edges. Red, viscous streaks crawling down the frame like it was weeping. He smashed the frame. Inside was another photo, one he'd never seen before. It was in color this time. It showed a park bench's trees, a forested background. And on the bench, a woman. Dana. She wasn't moving, but her eyes were open, looking at him. Mark broke. He packed a bag, grabbed the photo, and drove out of Harlan, Kentucky without telling anyone. He had one goal now: find where the photo was taken, and maybe bring her back. He posted to several subreddits under a new alias. Our true horror stories, our national park stories, even our let's not meet. He blurred the image and asked anyone recognize this park. Dozens replied with guesses, but one stood out. A user called Old Fire Tower 33 wrote, "That's Memory Bench, Shenandoah National Park, deep trail past Section 7. Locals don't hike there anymore, not since 2002. Mark a place he'd already seen circled in red on his wall. He drove for 2 days, arrived at the park entrance and lied his way in, claiming he was researching true scary stories for a book. The ranger, a gaunt man with sallow eyes, simply nodded. "Section 7, he asked. "You sure?" Mark said yes. The ranger handed him a crude, hand-drawn map. "I wouldn't stay past dark," he said. "The woods don't like to be remembered." The trail was overgrown. Fog rolled in faster than expected. Mark passed carved trees, old ranger signage, even a rusted watchtower that looked like it hadn't been used since the 80s. He kept walking. Eventually, he found it, the bench. Just just like in the photo, empty now. But when he sat down, he felt it. Not cold, not fear, but presence. As if he was being cataloged, like a file being added to a system. He closed his eyes, the air shifted. When he opened them, he wasn't in Shenandoah anymore. He was in the photo. Trees no longer moved with wind. They pulsed with thought. The sky above flickered like a dying bulb. And across from him sat Dinah, her eyes glossy, her voice flat. You came. Mark moved to touch her, but his hand passed through her like smoke. I'm here, she said again, but I'm not me. Behind her, more children, hundreds. They stepped between trees through shadows from reflections. All silent, all watching, and then all spoke at once. Tell our story, Mark screamed. Woke up on the bench, covered in leaves. The sky was dark. He checked his phone, no signal, battery dead. The photo he'd brought was gone. Instead, his bag was filled with photos of other people. Campers, rangers, families, all black and white, all staring at the camera, all dated. Some from decades before photography existed. He left the woods. Didn't speak for 2 weeks. Then he posted again. This time, a long-form entry in a niche horror blog. I've seen them. The forest doesn't haunt us, it preserves us. Our stories, it tells itself. Every forgotten person, every lost camper, hiker, ranger, they don't vanish. They're curated, memorized, stitched into the grain of bark and whispers of fog. Every creepy story you read isn't fiction, it's a record. He ended with, if you see a photo that shouldn't exist, don't look away. Remember, then write it down. Tell someone, because forgetting is what feeds it. That post spread like wildfire. Shared on forums, YouTube narrations, TikTok shorts, hashtags trending. The true creepy stories, cursed photo, a national park mystery. Many dismissed it, others knew better. A community began to form. People with their own photos, their own wilderness stories, their own creepy stories too strange to say aloud until now. They met weekly on live streams. They called themselves The Archive. And Mark, he was never seen again. But new photos keep surfacing. Sometimes in inboxes, sometimes in attics, sometimes mailed anonymously to park ranger stations across the country. All of them have one thing in common at the center of each: a bench, and a man sitting on it, smiling. The internet didn't kill the photo. If anything, it made it stronger. Mark's final post had seeded something. What began as a single image tied to a tragic story had now multiplied. Dozens, hundreds of users from all over the US began sharing eerily similar tales. Some uploaded faded photographs to subreddits like "Our True Horror Stories," "Our Creepy," and "Our Let's Not Meet," with captions like, "This appeared in my attic. No one in the family recognizes the boy. I took this photo at Yellowstone, but the person standing next to me wasn't there. There's a child in every reflection now. I can't leave the house." The comment sections filled with speculation. Some believed it was an elaborate ARG. Others dismissed it as internet folklore, the modern version of Bloody Mary or the Slender Man. But a few, the quiet ones, responded with dread. They had seen that child before. A popular horror podcast, Let's Read, did a 5-part series called The Archive Bench. The host read submissions from anonymous listeners across the country. Many were national park stories, hikers and rangers alike, describing unexplained moments, trails vanishing behind them, creepy outdoor stories involving whispering trees or old cameras capturing things the eye never saw. The episode that went most viral involved a veteran park ranger from Arizona. He described finding a series of Polaroids pinned to trees in a section of desert near petrified forest. Each photo showed a different part of the trail. Each one had a timestamp, but none were in order. And in every image in the far background, a small child stood motionless. "I didn't see him in real time," the ranger said. "Only later when I looked at the photos. He turned That same week, the stories weren't limited to the wilderness anymore. Soon, people in cities reported strange events, distorted reflections in subway windows, flickering CCTV frames showing children who weren't there, or mirrors that captured movements the real person hadn't made. A YouTuber known for covering true creepy stories uploaded a video titled, "I think my apartment is remembering someone else." In it, she walks viewers through her Brooklyn studio showing a framed photograph she never bought, yet one that has started changing. At first it was an empty chair, then someone sitting in it, then someone looking directly at the lens. The channel went dark 2 weeks later. Across Reddit, a new thread began to emerge. Anyone else losing time? Users claimed they'd black out for minutes or hours, only to wake in strange places, holding unfamiliar photos. In each image, the same pattern, a person turning away, then turning back, then smiling. A horrifying realization began to spread. These weren't just scary stories, they were true scary stories being written in real time. By the forest, by the photos, by something older than digital memory. It was around this time that the Park Service tried to intervene. Officially, there was no mention of hauntings, disappearances, or memory-manipulating photos. But internally, several park ranger stories were flagged by the Department of the Interior as ongoing, unexplained phenomena. Emails leaked. Rangers were advised to stay clear of certain zones, many deep within woods, others near abandoned ranger stations or in areas recently hit by wildfires. One internal memo read, "Field Report 753A, Shenandoah, multiple sightings of figures matching historic photographic evidence. Location marked for indefinite closure. Refer to the archive protocol." Whistleblowers released these details to podcasts, horror forums, and even late-night AM radio segments. One former ranger claimed that during night patrols in Yosemite, he'd stumbled upon an old cabin never recorded on maps. Inside photos of people from the 1930s to the present day, all candid, all inside national parks. And in each photo, a blurred child at the edge of frame, always watching. Back in Harlan, Kentucky, where it all began, the old Victorian house stood empty, or so it seemed. Neighbors said they'd hear music late at night, old jazz warped by age. Lights flickered on and off. A delivery man once claimed he saw someone looking out from the upstairs window, a boy with hollow eyes. A paranormal team filmed a YouTube series on the house. Their video haunted house that writes its own story amassed 3 million views in a week. But the team never uploaded a part 2. Only the first video remains, and near the end, as the camera pans over the living room, a photo can be seen on the mantle. A black and white photo, a boy at the window, and behind him, someone else, smiling. Meanwhile, stories continued to emerge from the most unexpected places. A girl camping in Oregon told her parents she played with the boy from the tree. She described him in detail down to his smoky eyes and black smile. When asked where he was now, she said, "He's behind you." Another creepy park ranger story surfaced from Montana. A team responding to a missing hiker found his camp intact food still warm. But every item he owned had been rearranged into a pattern, a spiral. And in the center, a single undeveloped camera roll. When developed, the photos showed only trees, except in one, a boy half hidden behind a pine trunk with eyes that glowed white. The hiker was never found. Researchers began digging through archives looking for early signs of this phenomenon. They uncovered true horror stories from the early 1900s, all describing children with shifting faces, windows that showed the wrong reflection, and creepy stories passed down among Appalachian families. Some believed it was folklore. Others thought it was a disease of the mind. But a few, the ones who had seen the photos change, knew better. This wasn't fiction. This was wilderness memory made physical. Then something changed. People people began to dream the same dream. They dreamt of benches in dark forests, of fog swallowing trails, of a boy standing in the center of a circle made of mirrors whispering, "Tell them, or they'll forget me." One dream in particular spread rapidly, a man in a cabin writing endlessly surrounded by photographs that breathed. When his hands bled, he dipped the pen in it and kept writing. Every dream ended the same way. The person wakes up. A photo is on their nightstand of a cabin and a man looking out. Folks from all walks of life, police, EMTs, teachers, park rangers, began reporting incidents. Photos that aged in reverse, mirrors that showed scenes from outdoors, stories people hadn't lived but remembered deeply, national park maps redrawing themselves, forests where birds didn't sing, and always, the photos. They told scary wood stories, but with one terrifying twist. They weren't made up. They were snapshots of memory from people who no longer existed. Then came the mass upload. One anonymous user posting under the handle Memory Root released a zip file of 13,241 images, all apparently taken in different locations spanning decades. Each image had GPS data. Each one had a timestamp, but not a single subject could be identified. Facial recognition software failed. All backgrounds were real, verifiable locations, from national park stories in Utah to abandoned lots in New Jersey. Many were tagged with names now missing from government census data. Some people claimed to see themselves in the photos as children. Others saw relatives long dead. A journalist who investigated the drop disappeared shortly after his article went live. The last line of his piece: "What happens when stories remember us better than we remember them?" No one knows who started it. Maybe it was Mark, maybe it was something older. But one thing became clear. Every scary story, every true creepy story whispered in online threads, written in campfire books, posted on Reddit, or told in podcasts. They weren't just entertainment. They were breadcrumbs, clues, messages from those who had already crossed over into something larger, something archival. Now, sometimes people wake up to find their own pictures altered. Old albums contain new faces. Mirrors reflect rooms they've never been in. And the boy, he smiles wider each day. Mark wasn't seen again, not in person, not online, but the stories kept coming. Weeks after his final blog entry went viral, strange packages began arriving at addresses across the country. To podcast studios, horror YouTubers, former park rangers, even paranormal investigators known for covering true, scary stories. Inside each package, a sealed envelope, a single undeveloped film roll, and a note. "Don't forget, develop in darkness. Tell them we're still here." Some ignored it, some didn't. The first person to develop one of the rolls was a Reddit user from R True Creepy Stories. He was a wilderness photographer from Montana, known for posting untouched images of fog-filled valleys and old ranger stations. His username was Pine Vision 87. One night he posted 6 photos, grainy black and white shots of a trail in Glacier National Park. Most were unremarkable, except for the last one. In it, a child stood at the tree line, and behind him, a man on a bench, smiling. Suddenly, everything accelerated. Across Reddit, a new subreddit was born, RR the Archive Bench. It became a digital museum for creepy park ranger stories, wilderness stories, and creepy stories tied to unexplained photos. But it wasn't just a place for stories, it was spreading something. Users reported blackouts, losing time. Some claimed they woke up miles from home, holding photos that didn't belong to them. Others said they found the photo the same black and white child appearing on their phone lock screens, even after factory resets. Someone posted the photo changes, even on digital. A park ranger from Washington posted a desperate voice message. "The camera traps at Olympic National Park are showing kids who aren't real. reformatted themselves. And in every case, one detail repeated the image of a child, sometimes still, sometimes blurred, always in the background, always watching. Back in Harlan, the old Victorian house stood silent, but it wasn't empty. A local YouTuber tried to live stream a 24-hour challenge inside. He lasted 4 hours. His final message recorded on a live broadcast. I looked at it. It blinked. The stream went black. The archive retrieved the footage. Frame-by-frame analysis showed something horrifying. At the exact moment we uttered the word, blinked a pale child's face, reflected in the window behind him, eyes wide, mouth agape. Later that night, viewers claimed their own mirrors flickered. Some heard tapping behind screens. Others reported dreams of the child whispering, "Remember me." Weeks passed, then months. The National Park Service, under pressure from internal whistleblower leaks, issued a statement. We are aware of online rumors regarding memory anomalies tied to certain parks. These are internet fabrications. All trails remain safe, but the leaked memos told a different story. Sections of Shenandoah Glacier and Big Bend had been marked closed until further notice. One field report stated multiple sightings of memory bench, shadows observed matching prior photographic anomalies. Recommend activation of archive protocol. The archive grew. They met every Saturday on live streams. Former skeptics, podcasters, hikers, creepy story collectors. They began comparing notes, GPS coordinates, tiny timestamps, objects seen in photos. Patterns emerged. A system, Mark's wall of strings, had become their map, and one theory dominated. These aren't just haunted places, they're recording devices, the forests. The photos, they're not showing ghosts. They're showing what the world itself remembers. This matched what Loretta Gaines had once said. The photo is a window, and windows go both ways. Then one day a new post surfaced. Anonymous, no handle, no tags. Just a single image. A bench in Shenandoah. Fog. And sitting on the bench, Mark, alive, but hollow-eyed. And beside him, Dana, her hand resting on his. Both staring at the camera. Captioned, "You're still watching." Tension builds. The viral post broke forums. It spread across TikTok, YouTube, Discord servers. Horror podcasts began dissecting it. Was this staged and AR'd, a final twist in a creepy horror story? But then came part 2. A user in Idaho posted under the handle Forest Stitcher. I didn't post this before because I thought it was coincidence, but I live near the Bitterroot Wilderness. Last year I found a bench in the forest. Same shape, same carving. "Remember me" etched underneath. I sat on it just to rest. That night, I dreamed of Dana. She was sitting at my kitchen table. She said, "You opened the window, now it sees you too." He included a photo, the bench, but not empty. A small child, face obscured by light, hand raised, like waving hello. YouTube horror narrators jumped on it, with titles optimized for creepy stories, true scary stories, and park ranger stories. Examples: I found a bench in the forest. What I saw still haunts me. Creepy outdoors. Stories you were never meant to hear. The Memory Bench, true horror story from Shenandoah. They flooded the algorithm with national park stories, scary woods stories, wilderness stories, and more. But each new upload brought strange side effects. Creators began reporting deja vu, equipment failures. Some lost days of memory. Others stopped uploading entirely. It was spreading offline. Printed photos appeared in mailboxes. No return address. Always the same photo: a foggy forest, a bench, a child, sometimes a dog, sometimes a couple, sometimes you. One Redditor wrote, "I found myself in the photo, not figuratively, literally. Me sitting at the edge of the bench, looking away, same jacket, same scar on my chin. But I never took that photo, I swear." His account was deleted hours later, but the image remains archived, shared, studied. It was titled, "Remember 413A." The archive deciphered the number. It matched a trail, a location in Utah. New maps began forming, and for those who dared follow them, one rule emerged: don't sit on the bench. The phenomenon spilled into major media. Some labeled it a mass hallucination digital psychosis. Others feared it was a sophisticated AI horror ARG. But the believers knew better. They saw the signs, photos that bled, reflections that smiled, digital files with metadata from before the internet existed. The deeper you looked, the more the pattern repeated: forests remembering people, photos remembering pain, trails whispering names long forgotten. A movement formed. They weren't paranormal hunters, they were archivists, witnesses. The archive's central database crashed. Every submission deleted, every video wiped. Only one post remained. A message from Mark. "I see you found it too. That means you're part of it now. You'll start seeing photos that don't belong. You'll remember things you never lived. You'll dream in grayscale, but don't be afraid. Just write it down, pass it on, because forgetting feeds it. And if you see a child in the background, don't smile back. They thought they could contain it." The archive tried encryption, locked files, air-gapped systems, paper-only records. None of it worked. The photo always returned. A week after the database crashed, a ranger in Denali found it again, this time carved into a tree. Not tacked, not drawn, carved. Lines scorched into bark like a warning from the forest itself. A bench, a child, and behind them, all of us, watching. Final report, unsent letter, found in a journal buried at the base of Shenandoah's memory bench. If you find this, it means you've seen it too. You know what the photo really is. It's not a cursed image, not a haunting. It's a map, a mirror, a mouth. The stories weren't fiction. The scary horror stories, the creepy outdoors stories, the national park stories, whispered around fire pits and Reddit threads, they were warnings, field notes, survival guides disguised as entertainment. The listener is not a ghost. It's the memory of the land itself. We walked through it and we left footprints in its dreams. It doesn't forget, it doesn't forgive, it records. Each time someone vanishes in the woods, without a trace, each hiker lost without a sound, each park ranger who quits and never explains why it grows. A wilderness without boundaries, a story without an end. And then for a moment, silence. No new stories, no photos, just stillness. People thought it was over. YouTubers moved on. Podcasters found new monsters. Reddit threads quieted, but only for a while. Until a family in Oregon posted a video, camping, laughing, sunset behind them, and in one frame, a reflection in the camper van window, a child smiling. The comment pinned to the top: "Did anyone else see the boy? He's not ours." And so the loop resets. The listener waits. Somewhere in the tree line, on a bench, no longer marked. In photos we no longer remember taking. In stories we mistake for fiction. In every forgotten name it whispers, "Tell them we're still here. Do not delete this story. Do not forget it." Because true creepy stories don't end. They wait, and they remember. Inspired by creepy park ranger stories, true horror stories, and viral Reddit threads. If you see the photo, don't look away. Write it down, share it, because the forest remembers those who don't.